All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Tishrei, Jerry and Sarah Wolaski, for dedicating all the Shum and Drushos this month. And the Schusar for Shalema for Zachariah Dov Ben Perel Shira, Shendin Avram Kelman, in memory of their beloved parents, and the Schus of all those who need her for Shalema. Dr. Linda Weinberg, in loving memory of her husband, Paris Moshe Ben Avram David, Leah Sol as a Schus for her daughter, and for Shlema, for her daughter Ilana Bas Esther, and for all those in need of Yeshuas. Our week of learning sponsors, Joel Hasner, in thanks in Hakaras Hatov, for all of our holy soldiers of the IDF. And again, should be Zochem Eretz Hashem, that all of our soldiers should Eretz Hashem have incredible Siyata D'Shmaya, incredible success in all of their endeavors. Our brothers and sisters of Eretz Yisrael should be safe together with their mishpachas, and halavai we should be Zochem Eretz Hashem to Geula B'Karov. We'll say with that, let us begin. A lot to do today. Today's daf is Samech Aleph 61, and we are picking up in Eretz Hashem on Samech Amud Beis 60b. We left off a couple of lines before the Mishnah. So we left off Amenas She'etin L'Chamikan, right? Those two das? Good. Amenas She'etin L'Chamikan. So let's just remember again. The Mishnah said, Reuven goes over to Rachel. He says, "Hariatne kudesh li, become kudesh on the condition that I give you money, whatever, 200 zuz from now until 30 days." So what's talach? The Mishnah said, if he gives it to her, she's mikudeshes. If he doesn't give it to her, she's not mikudeshes. So the Gemara says, okay, pshita. I don't understand. Like, why? I will say that some of these cases are obvious. He made it tonight. So what's talach when you make it tonight? If you fulfill the tonight, if you fulfill your condition, good. Then ultimately, again, the transaction actualizes, and if not. To which the Gemara says, "Ma'odetema lav tanohu or the zaruzei ka'amar." You might have thought maybe it's not a tanai. This is actually a fascinating idea. It's not a Tanai. Rather, what is he doing? He's trying to encourage himself to go ahead and give the money in a timely fashion. Kamasha and the Gemara says, no, it actually is a Tanai. It was an incredible Musar Haskell. What's human nature? Human nature is that if you have something to accomplish and it doesn't have a deadline, 9 out of 10 times what happens? It doesn't get done. It's an incredible yesod. Just not even in our professional lives, in our personal lives as well. Just if something, all of us are busy, right? Baruch Hashem, we're running in so many different directions and doing so many different things. And sometimes things just get lost in the shuffle, not because they're unimportant, but just simply because they get eclipsed by something else. When you give yourself a deadline, you tell yourself, I'm going to accomplish X, and it's going to be accomplished by so-and-so time, Lizaruze nafshe. Sometimes what that does is that encourages you to get the job done and doesn't let it fall by the wayside of life. Okay, over here it happens, the Gemara says, no, that's not what his intention is. Intention, mamish, is to go ahead and create the natural tonight. Okay, good, let's go right there. Says the Gemara. Sorry. Good. So on the condition that I have 200 zuz, also remember again, so what's talacha? Reuven says, Rachel, Hariat Mekudesh, the condition that I have 200 zuz. What did the Mishnah say? If he has 200 zuz, then she's Mekudeshes. The Gemara both say, so the inference from that is, if we don't know him to have 200 zuz, she's not Mekudeshes. So we'll say, but one second, why aren't we choshesh? We'll say, first wide line, 60b. Why aren't we choshesh that maybe he does have? In other words, maybe he does have money, we just don't know about it, right? Isn't that possible? I'm sorry, just forgot to... Right? Maybe he does have money. We just don't know about it. To which the Gemara says, furthermore, we learned Chashinon Shem Yishlo. The Brisa actually says about saying that in these cases we have to be choshesh that maybe he does have the money. To which the Gemara says, Lokasha, Habi Kiddushay Vada, Habi Kiddushay Safek. We will say when the Mishnah says that Reuven goes over to Rachel, he says, become a kodesh just on the condition that I have 200 zuz. So the Mishnah essentially says, if we don't know that he has 200 zuz, then ultimately again she's not nekudeshes. What does it mean she's not nekudeshes? It's not a vadai kiddushin. When the Brisa says chashinon that he has 200 zuz, it means it's Safek Kiddushin. So we'll say what comes out of it is something fascinating. When Reuven goes over to Rachel and he says to her, become a Kudeshes on the condition that I have 200 zuz. So we'll say, she is from that moment on Safek Mekudeshes. Now, again, if it turns out that he has money, then she's vaday mikudeshes, certainly mikudeshes. But interestingly enough, there's always going to be like the specter of Kiddushin hanging over her. It's always going to be safek mikudeshes, because maybe he has the money. We just don't know about it. Very interesting. Amanas she'erech masayim zuz. So we'll say, so again, halacha l'maisa Mishnah said, he says to become mikudesh on the condition that I show you 200 zuz. So we'll say, so now again, let's say he, like you say, he takes her to the bank. He says, look, 200 zuz, right? So l'maisa, again, that's not what he means. We understand in that tonight that what is he referring to? He's referring to his own money. So Tana lo niskavna ela liros mishalo. When she agrees to this, Rabbi says she's agreeing under the premise that he has 200 zuz. That's what she's agreeing to over here. Okay. Similarly, again, if he's a money changer. If he's a money changer, and he says to her, I'm going to show you 200 zuz. And he shows her 200 zuz. Where are the 200 zuz? Right on the table in front of him. That's not mikudeshas. Why? Says the Gemara. Now, so the Gemara says, Pshita, that's obvious. In other words, based on what we just said before, when he talks about money, when you talk about money in Kiddushin and showing her money in Kiddushin, how do we understand showing her money in Kiddushin? What does that mean that he's showing her money? His money. His money. So showing her someone else's money is obviously irrelevant. To which the Gemara says, no. Now we'll say the money changer case is an interesting one. Why is it interesting? Because the money changer case, when there's money on the table, we'll say, remember, how does a money changer make his money? How does he make his money? I guess he can make his money in a couple of different ways, but one of the ways he can make his money is he gets a chelik of every transaction. So therefore, technically speaking, when there's literally money on the table, right, we'll say, who has a chelik in the money on the table? The shulchani. So he can show her 200 zuz. Is that 200 zuz his? No, but a chelik of that 200 zuz is, or maybe there is enough money on the table that combined all the money, there is 200 zuz worth of his profit embedded in that. So but that might be true, but that's not her das. Her das is, if you promise me that you have money, or you promise me to show me money, you're showing me your money. Exclusively your money. If you're not showing me your money, then the Tanai ultimately again has not been satisfied. Incredible, I will say. That's our Gemara. Mishnah. Amna sheishli base kor afar. So we'll say, so now we're transitioning to a similar case, just now going from money to real estate. Reuven says, Tzurach, I'll become mikudesh to me on the condition that I have base kor. We'll say base kor. Base core, actually, it's funny, it doesn't actually refer to, let's say, area of land. What it actually refers to is the amount of land that can produce a certain amount of produce. So he says, on the condition that I have a base core, we'll say base core has 75,000 amos. I have a lot of land, about 75,000 amos of land. So he says, becoming Mikudesh on the condition that I have a base core of land. So what does the Mishnah say? As long as he's got the land, she's Mikudeshes. So we'll say if he says to her, become Mikudeshes on the condition that I have land in a particular place. Okay, so if he has it, she's Mikudeshes. If he doesn't have it, she's not Mikudeshes. Amanas she'erech base kor offer. Interesting. Become Mikudeshes on the condition that I show you a base core of land. I'm going to show it to you. Hare zu mikudeshes v'yir ena. She's mikudeshes as long as he shows it to her. And I will say now, just like the money cases, all of these are assuming that who owns the land? Who owns the land? Reuven owns the land. So therefore I will say if he takes her to a large valley and shows her land and says, look at the land, right? That's not Mikudeshes, right? She's not interested in seeing land. She's interested in seeing Reuven's land. Incredible. So it says the Gemara, V'nechosh shema yeshlo. Go back to the first case, right? So Reuven goes over to Rachel. He says, become Mikudeshes on the condition that I have a base core of land. So what did the Mishnah say? She's Mikudeshes as long as he has it. Which makes it sound from the Mishnah that if he doesn't have it, she's not Mikudeshes. But maybe we should be choshesh that he does have it, and we just don't know about it. To which the Gemara says, furthermore we learned, both say, in fact, the Brisa says that. The Brisa says you have to be choshesh that maybe somewhere, somehow, he does have land, and therefore, Allah Chalamaisa, she should be safek mikudeshes. To which the Gemara says, you're right, lokashya, habi kiddushay vaday, habi kiddushay safek. We'll say, you're right. The Mishnah is talking about kiddushay vaday. We'll say, how do you establish a case of kiddushay vaday? Certain kiddushin, by knowing with certainty that he has land. The Brisa says, however, when you make it tonight like this, Rachel is going to be Mikudeshes Misafek. Why? Out of a chashash that maybe he does have land somewhere that we don't know about. So the Gemara says, 1 second. So effectively what you've done is you've stated the same case twice. So let's go back for a second. Reuven says to Rachel, Hariat Mikudeshes li amenas, on the condition that I have 200 zuz. So what's the halacha in that case? What's the halacha in that case? What's the halacha? If he has the money, then what? Mikudeshes. What if he doesn't have the money? Safek Mikudeshes, right? That's what comes out of this, right? So why? Chashinon, maybe he has the money somewhere. Okay, now case 2, become Mikudeshes, right? Reuven says, Rachel, become Mikudeshes li, amenas, that I have a base core of land. What's the halacha? If he has it, Mikudeshes. If he doesn't have it, Safek Mikudeshes. It's the same halacha in all of these cases. What we're saying is, even if we don't know that Reuven possesses the money, or we don't know Reuven possesses the land, we have to be choshesh that maybe he does. So if that's the supposed to say, it's the same concept. So the Gemara says, why do you have to state the same concept of Safek Mikudeshes in both cases? I'll tell you why. The Gemara says, Shricha, let's say out of it like this. I understand why she's Safek Mikudeshes in the case of money. Why, Rabbi say? People hide money. People hide money, right? They hide money, right? It's in the news now. Who's the senator from New Jersey? Menendez, right? Again, sometimes it's good to have spare cash at home, gold bars, right? It's good to have it. You never know, right? People do hide money. People do hide money. Land, you can't really hide. In other words, I would say people know about land ownership. They know about land ownership. So because of that, again, halacha l'ma'isa, I understand why Safek Mikudeshes by the case of land. By the case of money, but by land, ultimately again, I would have thought that if he had it, we would know about it. Kamash mulano. Kamash mulano say even by land. Well, you see this. Sometimes you see this like when people, high-profile people, purchase real estate. Often they're purchasing it through companies, right? They're not necessarily purchasing it as individuals. So again, see, even land, it could be that halacha l'maisa, the person owns it, but ultimately, again, no one knew about it. All right, incredible. So it says as follows: Almanas sheish li makom ploni miyishlo. So we'll say, so remembering in the Mishnah, it said on the condition that ultimately, again, I have land in a particular area. And so what's the halacha? If he has the land in the area, good. If not. So pshita. That's obvious. So ma'od what would you have thought? Amar le mai nafkamina ana tarachna umaisina kamash. Listen to this. So now Reuven says to Rachel, become Mikudesh to me on the condition that I have land. We'll call it in Beit Shemesh, right? And then it turns out that he has land in the Galil. So he has land. So remember, what does the Mishnah say? If he doesn't have the land in Beit Shemesh, so then at the end of the day, she's not Mikudeshes. So the Gemara says, what would you have thought? So it's obvious. He didn't fulfill the Tanai. So what would I have thought? I would have thought he could say to her, listen, what does it matter to you, Rachel, if the land is in Beit Shemesh or the land is in the Galil? At the end of the day, it's on me to transport the produce home and to take care of the business and take care of the agriculture. So it shouldn't really matter to you the location of the land. Kamash l'rabosai. A Tanai is a Tanai. And since he indicated to her that I have land in this particular spot, this particular place, if he doesn't satisfy the Tanai, then ultimately, again, she is not Mikudeshes. I'm sorry, so good. So the Gemara says as follows. Then we'll say the Mishnah said, on the condition that so Reuven says to Rachel, become Mikudesh on the condition that I show you a base core of land. So we'll say, what's the halacha? If he owns the land, she's Mikudeshes. If he doesn't own the land, she's not Mikudeshes. To which the Gemara says, Tana, lo niskavnuzu ela liros mishelo. I will say, remember again, he's not just showing her land, right? What is he doing? He's showing her his land. Okay? Now, if he shows her land in the valley, right? In other words, we'll say, what does it mean he shows land in the valley? He shows her land, but it's not his land. It's not his land. She's not Mikudeshes. So, pshita lo tzricha dinokit b'distura. Pshita lo tzricha dinokit b'distura. So we'll say, what does this mean? We're talking about a case where he's a sharecropper. So Rabbi say, let's say he shows her land in which he has a sharecropping agreement. So Rabbi say, I might have thought that satisfies the obligation or the Tanai. Kamash Malan, it doesn't. It doesn't. When he tells her, I want to show you land in the valley, I will say, what is he saying? How do we understand that tonight? What kind of land do I want to show you? My land. I will say, what's the definition of my land? What's the definition of my land? Right? A land that I and only I own. A land that I and only I own alone. Does that make sense? Is that good English? Right? Okay. I say, good. This guy, I've done better. Thank you. Good. Now you know what? Now I'm doubling down on that. Right? A land that I and only I own alone. Right? In other words, yes. Now it has a ring to it. So the nice again. So that Kamash Shmalan, even though an aris, a sharecropper, owns a percentage. We'll say it's just like the Shulchani case that we saw before. He shows you the table of money. Maybe there is a combined 200 zuz, but that's not all his money. When he says, I'm going to show you my land, he means my land. So even if he has a sharecropping agreement, that's not enough. Good. So let's listen to this. Gabi hektish nan. I will say by hektish, so remember, by hektish means a person is going to be makadesh, person is consecrating their land. So for example, it says Amakdish Sadeu. Now interestingly enough, the case over here, the actual way this case is going to work out is there's actually not a case of a person consecrating his land. Rather, again, it's a person ultimately redeeming his Sdei Achuza, his ancestral land from Hekdish. So the ancestral land was consecrated. He's now redeeming that ultimately again from Hekdish. So Makadesh Sadeu. So a person consecrated his land, and now he wants to go ahead and redeem it. So the way this works, well, let's see. He says over here, it says, B'shas hayovel, during the yovel. And take a look at Rashi, which is B'shas hayovel, B'zman shayovel noeg, shekol sdei achuza pidyono shavem migzeres hakosov, achas yofeh v'achas ra'ah. Aval b'zman she'ina yovel noeg. So the way this works is as follows. Halacha l'maisa, when it says B'shas hayovel doesn't mean during the yovel year. B'shas Yovel means when the concept of Yovel applies. So when the concept of Yovel is in effect, ultimately again there is a process for redeeming ancestral land. The way that works, as we're going to see in just a moment, is Nosin Bezera Chomer Sa'orim. Chamishim shekel kesef. Shabbos says, so essentially, for every core, right? For every core, chomer is a core. For every core, ultimately again, of sa'orim, of barley, that the field has the ability to go ahead and produce, you pay 50 shekels. So in other words, Shabbos say, interestingly enough, redemption of an ancestral field during the time when Yovel is in effect is based on the potential output of that field. So for every core, for every chomer, for every core that ultimately, again, the field has the ability to produce, halacha l'maaseh, that's 50 shekel. That's 50 shekel. That becomes the redemption amount. Fine. So I'll say, what's the halacha? So therefore what we do is obviously we look at the entire area of the land. So here's an interesting point. What if on the field there were nekaim amukim asar tfachim? Ditches, thank you, ditches, right? Ditches in the field that ultimately again go down 10 tfachim. So they extend down relatively deep, right? Oslaim gavam asar tfachim. Or you have rocks. Right? You have rocks or mounds that extend more than 10 tefachim. Ein nimdadin ima. So we'll say they're not counted as part of the field. Interesting. In other words, for this calculation of redemption, so either again ditches that are more than 10 tefachim deep, and I will say, if you notice, by the way, the area of the ditch actually doesn't matter. Right? What matters is the depth of the ditch. Right? So ditches more than 10 tefachim deep ultimately again are not counted, and mounds more than 10 tefachim high are not counted. Pachos mikan nimdadin ima. Less than that amount, they're counted together with the field. Interesting. So the Gemara says, we asked, maybe, okay, so I understand why perhaps those areas, right, the ditch that is 10 tefachim deep or the mound that is 10 tefachim high, were not included in the hektish declaration of the field. Why, Rabbi say? Because at that height or that depth, essentially what happens, they have an identity of their own. So I understand why they're not mekudash, they weren't consecrated together with the field. But however, again, the Gemara says, nikdishu ba'apei nafshayu. Why not go ahead and have have them achieve a level of Kiddushin, a level of a hektish on their own. In other words, let them achieve a hektish status independently of the field. But take a look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, Nehid v'hadi ar lo kachi, lios nimdadin bekarka shava, lios so I understand why the mound and the ditch won't be counted as part of the primary field, because again, because of the height and because of the depth, they have a chashivas of their own. But look at the next Rashi. So why don't you just calculate them on their own? In other words, for redemption purposes, so the Bryce is saying they're not counted as part of the field for redemption purposes. Fine. So, but let them be counted on their own, independently, to which the Gemara says, so maybe you'll say, well, one second. Maybe I was saying an area less than a base core simply is not counted towards this redemption. Because remember, again, the redemption formula, Rabosai, is how much barley could a particular field create within a particular amount of land. So maybe if it's not a base core, it's not included in the calculation of redemption. Or minar is a kash on that. The pasuk says soda. Both say the pasuk says field. So why does the pasuk have to say field? Lefish ne'emar zera chomer sa'orim. Because both say the pasuk uses lashon of zera chomer sa'orim. Right? We look at how much. Ultimately, again, how much we measure how many kurim, how much kur could one field produce of barley. So I would have said, Ili ela shektish be'inyan zeh. Therefore, again, it sounds like the only time that this redemption formula applies, ultimately, again, is when you've produced a field that is capable of at least creating or at least producing a core of barley. So the Gemara says, Minayin the rabos, lesech, v'chatzi lesech, sa'ah, Tarkov, v'chatzi Tarkov, v'afilu rubmin. Say, how do you know that halacha l'maisa, the ability to go ahead and consecrate the field of any size, ultimately again will be subject to this redemption formula, again a prorated formula. Talmud lomar soda mikol makom. They also say the pasuk says soda. What does soda teach you? No matter what size of the field that you consecrate, A, the consecration is valid, B, the redemption formula will still apply. So what's the case? So let's just go back for just a second, right? So remember again, we're trying to figure out now, so I understand if I have a field, I have an ancestral field that I was makdish, I now want to go ahead and redeem it. The way to redeem it is 50 shekel per core of barley that could be produced in this field. That's the redemption formula. And now the Mishnah introduced me to the concept that ultimately, again, if there are ditches more than 10 tefachim or mounds more than 10 tefachim, they're not counted as part of the field. To which the Gemara says, okay, count them independently. So therefore the Gemara says, Amar Mar Ukva, what's the case? Hacha b'nekaim meleim mayim askinan. Interesting. What are we talking about over here, Bosai? We're talking about ditches that are filled with water. So Bosai, in other words, so the Havamina to say that the ditch should be counted independently, Rabosai, is what? Is that you could plant in it. So see how much it could produce, create a redemption formula based on that. The Gemara answers, we're talking about unplantable or unusable ditches. Why are they unusable? They have water. Therefore, Abosai, they're not counted as part of the field, ultimately, again, for the redemption formula, and they're also not counted on their own. Dekanami Diktani, we learned, Dumya Dislam Givoim. Abosai, it equates the ditches with the large mounds. Just like a large mound, you can't plant on it. Right? It's unplantable. So too, again, the ditches in question are also unplantable as well. Shmamina, ihachi afilu pachos mikan nami. So I'll say, if that's the case, I don't understand. If that's the case, we're talking about ditches that are filled with water. So then why does it have to be 10 tefachim in order to be excluded from the count of the field? Why not even less than 10 tefachim? It should be. So say, remember, going back for just a second, when we speak about, remember the Mishnah said ditches 10 tefachim or more, mounds 10 tefachim or more. The inference from that is, if the ditch is 9 tefachim, what's that? What's halacha? We include it as part of the field, but I don't understand. If it's filled with water, then no matter what the depth is, ultimately it should be excluded from the field. So this is very interesting. The Gemara says, Hano nagani da'ara mikru, shadura da'ara mikru. So we'll say, when you have ditches that are less than 10 tefachim, those are called Those are called nagani da'ara. Rashi says, or nagani da'ara hanikam kruyin agonos hakarka shemayim mismantzon tocham. They're called like watering spots or irrigation ditches. In other words, less than 10 tefachim that are filled with water is considered to be something which actively services the rest of the field. Similarly, again, when you have mounds that are less than 10 tefachim, that's called shidra da'ara. Shidra means like the spine of the land. In other words, there's a recognition of Osai that the topography of any given field is not necessarily just straight. So therefore, again, less than 10 tefachim is just considered to be part of an appendage of the field. More than 10 tefachim, already again, that's more significant. That's considered to be independent. Incredible. So the Gemara says, sure, right, good. So Gabi Mecher, so remember, up until now, we've been learning about Hektish. So the halacha by Hektish, once again, is, now this is a very specific case of Hektish, I'm being Makdish ancestral land, the Stei Achuzah. So now again, if I want to go ahead and redeem my Stei Achuzah, when the laws of Yovel are in effect, there's this redemption formula based on output, based on how many base core of barley the field could create. What I've now learned is, if the field has ditches of 10 tefachim or more, or mounds of more than 10 tefachim or more, what's the halacha? They are not included in the redemption formula. That's by hektish. They will say, contrast that. This is actually very interesting. Gabi mecher. What about by a sale of land? I'm selling real estate. So gabi mecher tanan homer lechavera base kor afarni mocher lecha. I'm selling. I will say, watch this. I'm selling Ruvain a base core of land. And what happens? V'hayu sham nikaim amuki masar tvachim o sloim gavar masar tvachim. So we'll say, what happens? It turns out that there are ditches more than 10 tvachim or mounds more than 10 tvachim. Ein nimdadin ima. Ultimately, again, I will say they are not counted as part of the sale. They're not right in dadinima. So pachos, they're not counted as part of the base core. Pachos mikan, less than 10 tefachim, nimdadin ima. Ultimately, again, they're counted. Now, I will say, interestingly enough, Mar Ukva said, even though what? In other words, they're not counted. So I will say, here's the chap. They're not counted as part of the field, even though they're not filled with water. Now, if they're not filled with water, I would have thought that technically they're fit to be planted. So therefore, yet they're still not included. My time, Amra Papa, the fish she'in Adam wrote says sheyitin esma osa besada achos. The year lo kishnayim ukishloshim makomos. Because in general, when a person purchases a field, he wants that field to have the appearance of just being one contiguous parcel of land. He doesn't want it to have the appearance, ultimately, again, of being chopped up by ditches or by mounds. So we'll say, so that's talacha by mecher. Hachamai. So we'll say, interestingly enough, so now we'll say, let's take a step back. So remember how we in this. Now, what about by Kiddushin? By Kiddushin, right? Reuven says to Rachel, Hariyat nikudesh asli, almana sheyeshli base core offer, right? On the condition that I have a base core of land. Rebbe say, now what happens? Let's say in the field there are ditches that are more than 10 tefachim, or mounds that are more than 10 tefachim. Do those ditches or do those mounds count as part of the field or not? So Rebbe say, so what do we say? So the Gemara says, Hachamai, lehekdish midamin Allah, or lemecher midamin Allah. Do we compare hekdish ultimately again? Sorry, do we compare kiddushin to hekdish? Remember again, in hekdish, the ditches and the mounds are included, right? The only reason they were excluded in this case is why? Remember why? They're filled with water, right? But normally, again, they would be included. So ultimately, again, do we compare Kiddushin to Hegdish? Or ultimately, again, do we compare Kiddushin to Mecher, to a sale? By a sale, we established ultimately, again, they're excluded. They're not counted. To which the Gemara says, Mistabra, lehegdish min amin Allah. We'll say it appears that ultimately, again, we compare Kiddushin ultimately to Hegdish. The Amrullah, Ana tarachna v'zarana umaisina. He says, no, we're going to include the ditches and include the mountains. Don't worry, it's on me. I'll get in there, and plant, or I'll get up there and plant. In other words, the tircha is on me. You don't have to worry about it. As long as there is a base core of plantable area, ultimately, again, that is enough. So therefore, I will say, halacha l'maisa, Again, I want to be clear on that. I would say, so remember, just by the hektish case, the reason why the mounds and the ditches were excluded is because the way the Gemara set it up was the ditches were filled with water and therefore unplantable. The mashmos from that is if they were plantable, they would be included. So again, by hektish, ditches and mounds normally would be included. By mecher, by a sale, ditches and mounds won't be included. Where does Kiddushin fit in? Bottom line, Kiddushin fits in. Kiddushin is compared to hektish. And therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, they're included, and he could say to her, don't worry, it's a plantable area, the extra effort is on me. Incredible. We'll say Mishnah. We'll say now we come to a really fascinating sugya. Rabbi Meir Omer, call tonight. So we'll say, so up until this point in time, we've been focusing on tanaim, conditions, right? So all of these cases have been where Reuven is affecting Kiddushin with a tanai, and we've just kind of been trying to figure out what is considered to be satisfaction of that tanai. Now Rabbi says something a little bit different. So the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, Rabbi Meir Omer, kol tanai she'eno kitanai b'nei Gad b'nei Reuven, eno tanai. Rabbi Meir says, any tanai that is not like the tanai of b'nei Gad and b'nei Reuven is not a tanai. Now we'll say, what's the tanai of b'nei Gad and b'nei Reuven? So we'll say, remember again, this is where, let's take a look at Rashi. It's a little bit of a long Rashi, but it behooves us to take a look at it. Tanai b'nei Gad and b'nei Reuven. Rashi says, v'afa pi shlonis kaima tanai. Now say, now listen to this. Let me say it's outside. The tanai of b'nei Gad and b'nei Reuven was as follows. If you, I don't know if you have one of newer Gemara and you have the psukim on the side, so you could take, actually let's take a look at the pasuk. Vayomer Moshe aleim im ya'avru b'nei Gad u'b'nei Reuven itchem es hayarden kol chalutz l'milchama lefnei Hashem v'nichbeh sha'aretz lefneihem u'nesatel mes ha'aretz ha'gila la'achuzah. So we'll say, so Moshe Rabbeinu says, remember, b'nei Gad and b'nei Reuven want to settle in the lands of Sichon and Og, quote unquote, on the other side of the Jordan. Moshe Rabbeinu says, if you go with your brothers to conquer Eretz Yisrael, if you go with your brothers ultimately again to conquer the land, right, then you could have your portion in the Transjordanian lands. They will say, fine, discussion over. But then Moshe did something very interesting. What did he do? He phrased the negative. And if you don't go with your brothers to conquer the land of Israel, you will not get your portion in the Transjordanian lands. So we'll say, so this becomes, yeah, the next verse, right? If you don't go. So what's interesting to note is Moshe Rabbeinu felt compelled to phrase this both in the positive, if you do, then you could have, and if you don't do, you can't have. He phrased the Tanai both in the positive as well as in the negative. So Rabbi say, Rabbi Meir calls this, Rabbi Meir understands that what Moshe Rabbeinu was doing was creating the paradigm for a Tanai. Paradigm for a Tanai is Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven. Rashi says, I'm sorry, let's go back to the Mishnah. Rabbi Meir Omer, kol Tanai she'eno kitanai b'nei Gad b'nei Reuven, eno Tanai. Shneimar, vayomer aleim, im ya'avru b'nei Gad b'nei Reuven, uksiv, vim lo ya'avru chalutzim. So Rabbi Meir says, every Tanai, in order to be a valid binding Tanai, must follow the Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven paradigm, which needs to be phrased both in the positive as well as in the negative. Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel Omer, tzarech hadavar la'omro. No. So also Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel says Moshe Rabbeinu is not creating a Tanai paradigm. He needed to convey something important. What did he need to convey? So the Gemara says, She'el malei keyish b'masha shafilu be'eretz Canaan lo yinchalu. So I will say, here's the problem. If Moshe Rabbeinu would have just said that Bnei Gad Bnei Reuven, if you don't go to battle, right? So remember, Moshe Rabbeinu says, if you go to battle, you'll get your portion. He had to say, if you don't go to battle, you won't get your portion. Where won't you get your portion? In the Transjordanian lands. But where will you get a portion? In Eretz Yisrael. I will say, I want to tell you something. There's no such thing as a Jew who doesn't have a portion in Eretz Yisrael. So I will say there are two places where every Jew has a portion, right? Right? Every single Jew has a portion in Olam Haba, and every single Jew has a portion in Olam Hazeh. But your portion in Olam Hazeh, to be honest, is not our homes that we own here. The portion of Olam Hazeh that we have, that each of us are entitled to, is a piece of Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, it's incredible. So Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel says, Moshe Rabbeinu had to phrase it in the negative as well, because the negative teaches me, Bnei Gad, Bnei Reuven, if you don't comply, you won't get the Transjordanian lands, but you will still get a portion in Eretz Yisrael. So again, he says, Fine. So had he not stated it in the negative tells me if you don't lead the war effort, you won't get your heir in the Transjordanian lands, but you will still get your heir portion in Eretz Canaan and Eretz Yisrael as well. So we'll say, so therefore, fundamental machlokes Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel. So Rabbi Meir says every single Tanai has to be doubled, has to be stated in the positive, has to be stated in the negative. And if it's not, then what? The Tanai is not binding. Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel, and where does Rabbi Meir get this from? He understands that Moshe Rabbeinu was creating a paradigm for Tanai. Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel says, no, he wasn't. Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't creating a paradigm, right? Rather, what was Moshe Rabbeinu doing? Moshe Rabbeinu was trying to convey to them, if you lead the battle, you'll get the lands you want. If you don't lead the battle, you won't get the lands you want, but of course you will still get a portion in Eretz Yisrael. Incredible. Says the Gemara, Shapir, coming to Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel, Rabbi Meir, right? Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel is saying good. In other words, he has a good time. He has a good response. Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says, no. Let's say, at the end of the day, all Moshe Rabbeinu needed to say, according to Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel, all Moshe Rabbeinu needed to say is, if you don't pass over, in other words, if you don't lead the war effort, you will get a portion ultimately again within your brethren. Beretz Canaan, why did Moshe Rabbeinu have to add in Beretz Canaan? Shma mino l'tnai kafel hu da'asa. It will say ultimately again because Moshe Rabbeinu was coming to establish a tnai kafel, a positive and a negative version of the same tnai. Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel Amar, ilo kasev rachmana Beretz Canaan, had the Torah not said, Moshe Rabbeinu not mentioned Eretz Canaan, hava minu v'no achsu b'sochachem begilad, Beretz Gilad. I would have thought ultimately again, means on the Transjordanian lands. Aval be'eretz Canaan klalo, but perhaps again Bnei Gad Bnei Ruvain would forfeit their portion in Eretz Yisrael altogether. Rabbi Meir says no. B'sochachem kol heicha de'islechu mashma. B'sochachem means within your brethren, and within your brethren ultimately means wherever Klal Yisrael is. Whereas Klal Yisrael is in Eretz Yisrael. Tanya, Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel, mashal ma'adav. So what's Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel says? He gives a mashal. It's an interesting mashal. He tries to prove a point from this mashal. He says the following: La'adam shayim mechalik nechasav lebanav. A man was dividing up his estate amongst his children. Amar, Ploni b'ni yirash sada ploni. So he says, my first son should inherit particular field. Uploni b'ni yirash sada plonis. My second son should inherit a particular field. Uploni b'ni yitain masayim zos v'yirash sada ploni. My third son, I want him to pay 200 zuz to the other brothers, and he'll inherit another field. And if he doesn't give the 200 zuz, then he'll just inherit alongside with his brothers with the rest of the estate. So the Gemara says, what causes him ultimately, again, if he fails to pay, what causes him to go ahead and inherit with the rest of his brothers in the estate? Kfelo garam lo, the doubling of the Tanai ultimately again caused him. In other words, so I will say, it's interesting, this isn't like a very compelling proof, because Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel is just creating, he's creating his own mashal that suits his shita, right? So what he's saying ultimately over here, he's saying over here that Allah Chalamaisa, that it's the doubling of the Tanami Garam Lo, the Yerusha Macham, Kfelo Garam Lo, I have a Halo Damya, so Halo Damya Mashal Masnisin, but the mashal doesn't fit with the Mishnah. Hasam katani yesh b'mashma shafilu be'eretz Canaan lo yinchalu. So I'll say again, you inferred from the Mishnah that if Bnei Gad Bnei Ruvain wouldn't fight, then what? They wouldn't even inherit in Eretz Yisrael. Alma kfeila le'eretz Gilad nami mahani. So the doubling of the Tanai would work for Eretz Gilad as well. V'achi katani mi garam lo l'yereshimachav. Here you're saying what caused him to inherit with his brothers? B'shar nechasim kfeilo garam lo alma kfeila l'shar nechasim hu dekamahani. But you're saying over here in the case of the mashal that say in the Mishnah, it sounds like the doubling would allow him ultimately again to inherit in Eretz Yisrael, not Gilad. Here I will say in the Mashal, sounds like ultimately again the Kfela, the doubling of the Tanai, would allow him to inherit with his brothers with the rest of the portion. To which the Lokasha, Hami Kamei Denema Le Rabbi Meir Vena Achsu, Halabasra Denema Le Rabbi Meir Vena Achsu. So the Mishnah is talking about before Rabbi Meir made his previous drasha of Vena Achsu. Here it's talking about after he made the drasha of Vena Achsu. Okay, so we'll say, so bottom line, out of all this, we have a fundamental machlokes. The fundamental machlokes is, when Moshe Rabbeinu made the double Tanai. Also, when you say double Tanai is phrasing the Tanai, the condition, in the positive and in the negative, right? Ultimately, again, Moshe Rabbeinu did that with Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven. Bnei Gad, Bnei Reuven. If you lead the military campaign in Eretz Yisrael, you can have the Transjordanian lands. If you don't lead the military campaign, you don't get the Transjordanian lands. So we'll say, Rabbi Meir says, Moshe Rabbeinu, you're creating a paradigm. Creating a paradigm, right? Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, he's not creating a paradigm. Not at all creating a paradigm. So why did he double it? Why did he double it? He was doubling it because, remember again, especially the negative part of the Tanai shows Bnei Gad, Bnei Reuven, if you don't lead the military campaign, you don't get the lands that you want, but what? But what? You still, of course, will get a portion in Eretz Yisrael. So that's the Shaila. Has Moshe Rabbeinu created a paradigm? We'll say, it's such a Musar Haskell. When great people do things, Rabbi saying, sometimes people look at their actions and they're like, oh, that's a paradigm. I will say this is very important to go ahead and be mindful of. Because I will say all of us are great leaders in some capacity. Maybe it's in our family, or maybe it's in our community, or maybe it's in our place of work, but all of us generally in some sphere of life have people who look to us. And it's important to understand that sometimes people will look at our actions and they'll say, oh, if so-and-so is acting that way, that must be a paradigmatic form of behavior. And how often, especially again in the context of children, that children could see, right? For a child, a parent is the leader. For a child, parent is their Moshe Rabbeinu. So if my parent is doing it this way, this must be the paradigmatic form of behavior. And let's say how careful we have to be with that to hopefully try to set the right paradigms for anyone who is looking to us for leadership. An awesome responsibility, but one in which we are obligated to bear. Incredible. So we'll say you have Rabbi Meir saying, Moshe Rabbeinu created a paradigm. Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel said, no, he didn't. So we'll say, so now we're going to come to some interesting cases. In the remaining time that we have, some really very interesting cases. So we'll say, let's go. So Bishlam, Rabbi Meir, Hainu Dichsiv, we'll say, this is wild. Imsetiv Seis. We'll say, this week's parsha, this is Cain and Hevel. Cain and Hevel. So remember again, after it's incredible. The timing of this is absolutely incredible. So I'll say, just I want to point out. Remember, Bnei Gad, Bnei Reuven, I'll say, what is that talking about? It's about war in Eretz Yisrael. War in Eretz Yisrael. So the Mishnah teaching about war in Eretz Yisrael. Gemara is now bringing down again this week's parsha. Incredible. So I'll say, so what is the pasuk? So remember, just to give you context that what happens if Cain was upset. 1 second, where I lost the Gemara. Good. Seif says. Remember again, Cain is upset because his carbon wasn't accepted. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to him, "Don't be sad, right? Halo im seitiv seis. If you improve yourself, teitiv, right? Seitiv, right? You make yourself better. Seis, you'll be lifted up." Vim lo seitiv, that is incredible. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Cain, if you don't improve yourself, lepesach chatas roveitz. Then ultimately, again, you will find yourself at this threshold of sin. So I'll say it is interesting that the Rebbe Shalom says to Cain both in the positive and in the negative. So the Gemara says, listen to this. So the Gemara says, Bishlam Rabbi Meir, so according to Rabbi Meir, it's incredible. According to Rabbi Meir, even the Ribono Shel Olam uses a Tanai Kafel, right? Now we'll say, now true, this is in Bereshis, this is before Matan Torah. You can't learn halacha from this, but what you can learn is what? Precedent. You can learn precedent. So you see that even the Ribono Shel Olam, when communicating with Cain, if you get shefela, if you get your act together, you're going to be great. If you don't get your act together, you're standing at the threshold of sin. Rabbi Chanina, Lamali, according to Rabbi Chanina, who says you don't need a Tanai Kafel. So why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu say both in the positive and the negative? Because you would have thought Imseitiv Igra. We'll say, it's interesting. Sometimes also the way we look at life is, I would have thought when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says Imseitiv Seis, if you improve yourself, then there'll be reward. And if you don't improve yourself, in lo seitiv, lo sigra v'lo dina. I'll say, I might have thought maybe the formula for life is like this. If you do good, right, im seitiv, if you improve yourself, there's reward. And I'll say, if you don't improve yourself, then what? Then what? Pariv. there's no reward, and there's no punishment. Kamashlan Rabosai, failure to improve oneself. The result of that, Lepesach Chatas Raves. Rabosai, if I'm not moving up, I'm only moving down. That's the way life works. There is no way to remain stationary in life. Imsetiv, I say such an incredible Musar Haskell. Imsetiv, if I improve myself, says I'm lifted up. Vimlo Setiv, if I don't improve myself, I don't improve myself, right? I don't do anything to lift myself up, then halacha lemaisa, not staying stationary, but ultimately, again, I'm only going down. Only going down. Incredible. I will say, what a Musar Haskell for life. There is no treading water in the sea of Ruchnius. If I'm treading, I'm drowning. If I'm treading, I'm drowning. I'm either moving up or I'm moving down. Incredible. So I will say, listen to this. Next parasha. Next parasha is Chaisara. This is incredible. This is by when Avram Avinu dispatches Eliezer to go find a wife for Yitzchak. So what does the pasuk say? If you go ahead and you try, and she won't come with you, as tina keme alasi, you will be absolved of mouth. Because remember again, Avram made Eliezer swear that he would only find the wife for Yitzchak from his family. So the pasuk says again, if you go and you try, and she doesn't want to come back with you, as tina keme alasi, then ultimately again you will be absolved of the oath. Ki saval mishpachti v'im lo yitnu lach vayisan ki ma'alasi. So once again, both say phrase in the positive and the negative. So this makes sense according to Rabbi Meir. Al Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel lamali. Why do you have to phrase it both in the positive and the negative? It's tzurich sadat chamina. So this is I would have thought as follows: Heicha denecha lo ledida v'lo necha lo ledido ma'isi bal karchayu. Otherwise, I would have thought like this. Maybe Avram was telling Eliezer, listen, as long as the girl wants to come, even if her family doesn't want to come, just bring her even against their will. Kamash malon imlo savaisha. So kamash malon no. Imlo savaisha lamali. So why does Pasuk have to say if the woman doesn't want, if the girl doesn't want? Itzrich sadait chamina hecha denecha ledido v'lo necha ledido nesa bakarcha. I would have thought halacha l'maisa. Maybe if the family was willing, but the girl wasn't willing, still bring her against her will. Kamash malon no. So what Avram Avinu was saying was as follows. The positive and the negative, the doubling of the oath, Rabbi say, are there to teach us what? Rabbi Avinu was saying to Eliezer, I only want you to bring back a wife if both what? The girl and her family are both interested in the shidduch. If one of the two are not interested, even if the other one is, do not bring back the girl. Incredible. One more, Rabbi say. One more. This is incredible. So also remember, Parshas B'chu Kosai. What does the Parsha say? Parsha says, if you walk in the ways of my statutes, Chash Baruch Hu says, you will receive reward. And then it says, if you despise my Torah, you'll be punished. So I will say, once again, phrasing it in the positive and the negative. Why do I need both? So both say, according to Rabbi Meir, this makes sense. You need both the positive and the negative. Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel lamali, who doesn't require tonight kafel. Let it just say in the positive. We'll say, let it just say, if you walk in the ways of my Torah, you'll receive reward. And I can understand that. If I don't walk in the ways of Torah, then chas v'shalom be punished. It's trich. We'll say, here we go. We'll say once again, like we saw before, by Kayin. We'll say, had it just phrased in the positive, I would have said like this. If you walk in the ways of Torah, bracha. We'll say, if you don't walk in the ways of Torah, parif. Parif, no bracha, no klala, kind of just, whatever, just parif. I would say, kamash malon, no, kamash malon, life doesn't work that way. Either, am b'chu gosai tilechu, and there's reward, or b'chu gosai tim asu, and there's punishment. I will say, such an overwhelming yisur. I will say, sometimes you learn these things, a person thinks to themselves, it's exhausting to be a Jew, right? In other words, I will say, no, don't we sometimes just want like a moment where I could just be. I could just be, right? I don't want to go up. I don't want to go down. I just want to be for a couple of minutes. Not a couple of years, just like 16 minutes, right? I'll even set the timer. I just want to be. Let's say the avoda that we have is Adam la'amal yulad. We were not put in this world to coast. And we were not put in this world to tread. And we were not put in this world to stay in place. We weren't. life is exhausting, and life is overwhelming, especially when we have a week like Klal Yisrael has had, and we feel spent. We feel spent physically, we feel spent emotionally, we feel spent spiritually. I will say, but when we feel most worn out is dafka the time when we have the obligation to push ourselves even more. Because I will say again, Akash Baruch Hu said this was Cain's failure. You see, Cain, if you think about it, and this will stop, what was Cain's fundamental failure? It's so fascinating. Cain's failure was, he realized he needed to up his game. But he figured there's a better way to up my game than go ahead and work harder on myself. How do you up your game? Eliminate the competition, right? So just take out my brother. And if I take out my brother, I'm the only guy left, and therefore by definition, I'm doing great. What Cain didn't realize, Rabbi, is that ruchnius is not relative. Ruchnius is not relative. In other words, my spiritual success is not relative to yours. Well, I'm doing much. Do you see that guy? Like, I'm doing so much more than that guy, right? So I'm doing great. There's always someone that you are doing better than in the realm of Ruchnius, and then there's always a whole segment of Klal Yisrael that you're doing much less than. Ruchnius is not relative. Right? At the end of the day, each of us has the obligation to push ourselves and push ourselves and push ourselves. And when we think that we can't push ourselves anymore, I push myself just a little bit more. Not even a lot more, just a little bit more. If I'm not going up, by definition, I'm not going down. And especially in these incredibly difficult times for Klal Yisrael, where sometimes we feel so powerless, we're not powerless at all. We are so dramatically and amazingly powerful, especially in the world of Ruchnius. And if we now recognize these lessons, if we just take the opportunity when we're most fatigued and most burnt out and most tired, just to give ourselves one more little nudge. We'll say that one more little nudge, that's where Kiddushin is. Kiddushin is not found in comfort. Kiddushin is found in that little moment of discomfort when I push myself a little bit more. Halavai, we'll each be zochem Eretz Hashem to find our bechul gosai telechu. We'll each be zochem Eretz Hashem to find our imsative seis. And Halavai, where we find Kiddusha, that's where Eretz Hashem we could do the most for our brothers and sisters. We'll say Shkoyach and Good Shabbos.